Hey, welcome to the Clear Truth Media Podcast. My name is Steven. I'm the founder of Clear Truth Media, joined today in studio with Joel Berry from the managing editor.
I am from the managing editor. I am not the managing editor.
You're from
I'm assistant to the managing editor.
That's what it felt like. I felt like I was making an office quote as I was speaking. Anyway.
Well, pretty much any conversation can be boiled down to office quotes. If you wanted to, you could speak in only office quotes, and most people would understand you.
Most of my staff here at the church is too young.
Wow.
I know. So I'm like, you guys need to go back.
Are we that old? My
yes,
gosh.
we are. We're old enough. You need to go back, all of you, and watch The Office. That way when I make references. Does everyone have that moment in life where they realize, I am Michael Scott? I have that moment often. Maybe it's because I'm like the boss.
Yeah, I think the boss probably.
Yeah,
every boss probably has a Michael Scott moment.
Yeah, you suck. All right.
I halpert at the camera every once in a while.
Yeah, right. Anyway, so we're 2 weeks into Clear Truth.
Yeah.
It's been a fun launch.
It has
been. We had
been.
a couple articles that just moved.
Yes.
And,
Some really, really interesting articles, some really, really well-written stuff.
What a title. Who came up with the title, The Most Evil Man in Evangelicalism?
That wasn't mine. That was pretty spicy.
That might have been Jamie. Maybe it was Seth Gruber who actually wrote the article.
Yeah, the Francis Collins article.
Yes, on Francis Collins. That thing really moved. I'm sure many of you out there, you're new to Clear Truth over the last 10 days. We launched on July 1st, but we had kind of soft launched before that. And so for all of you who have recently joined us, thank you. Thanks for following us on X and YouTube, and some of you have become subscribers. So got some of that this first week. We have some
subscribers already.
We do, I know, actual real life subscribers.
Are we allowed to say how many, or is that
I don't know what the
strictly held
exact number
secret?
is. So yeah, massive secret. When we hit a number that's shareable, we'll share it.
Yeah.
Right. But in the meantime, thank you.
It's kind of similar to what the Babylon Bee did. A few years ago, the Babylon Bee made a very calculated decision under Seth Dillon to go into a subscriber-based model.
Yeah.
As Facebook was starting to throttle our traffic and Google ads were starting to go away. We were completely subscriber supported now, and that's a good way to be. You don't want to be performing for big tech and for big tech traffic and for big tech ads,
or Big Eva.
Or for Big Eva,
I don't know what that means.
We're here to serve our subscribers, and so it's the best model, I think.
Yeah. So for those of you out there listening, you can subscribe. It's just $10 a month. It's at this point really you're just kind of making a donation. You also get to connect with the contributors.
Yep.
We'll do a State of the Union later this month,
and we're working on bonus content. Actually, right after this podcast, we're going to go into your office and we're going to work out some bonus content. for everybody.
Just a little extra content. We're not trying to compete with Netflix or Disney Plus or anything like that. As far as content libraries, but there'll be some extra stuff and some ability to connect with contributors. You can also make comments on the post, and in a couple of weeks, you'll be able to create your own forums and threads.
You can fight and argue
all you want about postmillennialism.
5 points of Calvinism and all that.
Yeah, we should have just one forum for every debated topic, right?
Yeah,
and we'll just let it go from there.
I think most of our traffic would probably come from that.
We'll make Foster the referee on all of it. Except for he'll just referee from his, jaded theological perspective, right? So anyway, it's been a great start.
Yeah.
Obviously, we started July 1st, so just a couple of days before, July 4th, celebrating our national birthday, and just a couple of days after the debate.
Yes.
So a lot of America stuff going on.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And at the launch.
Do you think it's over for our President Biden here?
For Biden, I don't.
You think he's going to stay in?
From the beginning, I've been on the team that I do not believe he is going to drop out. And my reasons for that, one, he's the president. And I know we like to believe in the deepest of conspiracies that he has zero control and he's just a puppet and everything else. But from 10 to 4 every day, that man is the cognizant president of the United States. Yeah. And I also say this, particularly when it comes to liberals, non-Christians, I'll say non-Christians in general. What else do you have to live for other than being the president of the United States?
Yeah.
And so for him to stop is kind of like saying my life's over.
Yeah. Well, it kind of is.
Yeah, well, it is. And I think he knows that.
Yeah.
And I think his son knows that his freedom is over. So, I don't think he's dropping out. I think that legally Kamala is the only one who can inherit the money.
Well, it is. I think it's interesting.
Kamala, Vice President Harris, I'll be respectful.
Yeah, I wrote a piece about this over on Not the Bee earlier. kind of like the illusion that this is a contest between two men and their qualifications has all been kind of stripped away.
Yep.
I don't think we've ever had an election that is more very clearly a contest between two competing worldviews, and who cares who is plugged into that slot representing those worldviews. We're fighting for the two very different visions for what America is and should be. And so, yeah.
So how do you then translate that into that there has been a recent shift in the polls? Do you think that's a worldview shift, or do you really think that there's a percentage of Americans, and it really only has to be 5 to 10%, that like true independent who will shift their vote, right? Because so many people, they're going to vote R, they're going to vote D, regardless.
I think I would suspect that a lot of the people that might shy away from voting Biden because of his mental, issues. I don't think they're going to go Trump. I would think they're just going to vote. They just won't vote, or they'll vote Green Party or whatever.
Yeah. Well, and some of them, I think there is a true independent. Again, it's probably 1 out of every 20 voters, right? So 5% of the vote.
I can't imagine being an independent in today's. I mean,
I know, I get it.
who is looking at this going, like, okay, well,
I mean, they're pretty much the same. Yeah. Well, but I think some of those people potentially are shifting because they just feel lied to.
Yeah.
And it's hard to say, well, these guys lied to me about his cognitive ability. How can I trust him with anything else?
I don't think we've seen the fallout from that yet. That, millions of people, I don't think we realize how many millions of people saw Biden mentally crash for the first time.
Yeah.
I mean, we've been seeing this on Twitter for 2 years. Sure. Conservatives know all this.
Yeah, and they were telling us they were deepfakes and lies.
Yeah, and most people hadn't seen all those. And so I think a lot
Twitter's
of people...
not real life.
Believe it or not. Thank God.
Yeah, right.
But yeah, the big question of if the media's been lying to me about this, what else are they lying to me about?
Everything.
That red pill moment that everyone has. I think there's a lot of that going on. And
the red pill just hit mainstream media.
Yeah.
Right? To 51 million people.
Yeah.
Watching. We have been lied to about this man. And so one of the things that comes up with that, and I got challenged by this, is I made a couple of comments on Facebook during the debate, and somebody was like, "Oh my gosh, you're always so political. Like, how can you be political as a pastor?" And aren't you?
I hate that so much.
I know. And then also
stay in your lane, pastor.
Yeah, right. Which clearly doesn't. My lane is not to speak to the thing that like affects our lives.
Yeah, put your theology in a lockbox and just put it in the ivory tower and don't touch it. Yeah.
Okay, and then also with that though, sometimes there's that like, well, you're just when you get into politics, you're engaging in the world. Jesus' kingdom is not of this world, and your idol worship of the nation or idol worship of Trump, that kind of stuff. We actually had a couple of articles about this on the site. Yeah,
so let's talk about that a little bit, because I think that is something that most evangelicals, particularly conservative evangelicals, right-leaning evangelicals, we've been kind of like browbeat for 10, 15 years about this from prominent evangelical leaders who say, political engagement is, idolatry, you're seeking power. Like you said, God's kingdom is not of this world. What did Preston Sprinkle say? We live in the shadow empire. Just stay in your shadow empire, Christians. And so I think still, I mean, even conservatives are a bit timid to be politically outspoken or unapologetically patriotic because they've just been shamed so much over it. What's your take on that? Well,
I think there's also an element too where people they're always scared to be accused, right? Of you're right, idol worship, or what would Jesus do?
Right.
What would the apostles do?
Yeah.
Right? Would they vote? Would they vote Republican? Would they talk about politics? And then also the other idea is like, well, you're inhibiting evangelism. Mm-hmm. You're going to scare people from Christian faith because they're just going to associate you with your politics.
Yeah.
So there's obviously, there's ditches on both sides of this thing. There's obviously a ditch on one side where, certain people can love their country over Christ in the same way that you can love lots of things over Christ, right? And there's warning there to not worship the things of this world. and to not place your deepest hope in the things of this world. And we need to avoid that. And we've talked about Christless conservatism. We talked about this, I think, on this podcast, that there is that, but that's not what we're talking about.
Yeah.
What we're talking about is an appropriate love for country. So you're married.
Yep.
You love your wife?
Yes.
Does that make you an idol worshiper?
I would hope not.
No.
I mean, it could be,
Sure.
if it was disordered in one way or another, but of course not. Natural love for your wife.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You're a Baptist.
Yeah.
You go to your church. Do you love your church?
I love my church.
I would hope that doesn't make you an idol worshiper.
Right.
And so we always talk about the three things that God ordained, right? The three establishments, which are the nation, the family, and the church. And so why is it okay? It's okay to love my wife. It's okay to love my church, right? And you should. I would hope. But we say I love my nation, and people throw the red flag.
And this is a pattern that I've seen with progressives, particularly progressives with an evangelical background who know how to speak to evangelicals, is when they want to destroy something, they make you ashamed for loving it.
Yeah.
And they did this. I remember the Emergent Church, 15 years ago, doing this with the Bible, talking about how
Sure.
if you believe in inerrancy and the sufficiency of Scripture, you're making the Bible an idol.
Right. Yep.
Like God can't be contained. I think that was a Gungor song. You can't be contained in a Bible or
Yeah,
whatever.
yeah.
You see where Gungor is now, but
Yeah, right. He makes beautiful things.
yeah. So it's there's this misuse of Christian language, and to believers who are not aware of it or don't know how to answer it. A lot of them have been kind of captured by it.
Yep. Yeah. And it isn't just the progressives. There are some people on the conservative side who are they're nervous about it. They don't want to get cast as that. And so they'll shy away from it too. And then they'll accuse people, clear truthers like us, or pastors who pastor the way that I do. They'll accuse us of ulterior motives. Right. All people are like, oh, you're only doing this because it's the fad of the day. And I'll always say, no, we're doing this because of a conviction that when there's evil out there, you have to call evil out.
Yeah.
And so it became the fad of the day only because I think people were doing it out of response to the Holy Spirit, which I would say that's not a fad, that's a move of God, right? It's Him, working one Spirit across.
Yeah, and there's another thing that has happened too, to where politics has increasingly become more and more and more important in the culture, important in our lives. Government is encroaching into our lives more and more, and so as government does that, are we just supposed to cede those areas of our lives to government and say, okay, well, that's a government thing now.
Yeah.
God has nothing to say about it because it's government. Well, that's ridiculous.
So let's, you know what I think it is? I think it always comes back down to conviction. And here's what I mean by that. So let's pretend it's 1862. And Joel Berry is a pastor in the South. And a conversation around slavery comes up. And Joel looks and goes, I'm not going to talk about that. That's political.
Too political.
It's too political. I'm not going to talk about it. And Joel gets up to preach a sermon on how the horrors of slavery should end. And all these other pastors come around and go, Joel, I can't believe you would do that. You're just trying to win the crowd or speak to the.
I almost guarantee that happened. I would love to be a fly on the wall
sure
to some of
did.
these churches. Yeah.
It's political. Don't talk about it.
Yep.
And so I look back and say, we know that there have been certain eras in the history of our nation where to not speak politically about what's going on, to not do it makes you a coward.
Yes.
Right? And to not do it is in essence saying, to hell with this.
Yeah.
Just let it go to hell.
Let it fall apart.
And affect whoever it may affect.
To me, I mean, just as a lay person, who doesn't I don't have a lot of things memorized, but I just think I always go back to salt and light. Christians are called to be salt and light, which, as I read that, tells me that Christians living in the world should change the way the world looks. We should be having an effect on our communities and our country and our culture. If we just ignore all that stuff, to me, that seems like salt losing its savor.
Yeah.
Very simple.
So what about the argument where people say, well, Jesus and the disciples didn't engage in politics? Here's my easiest rebuke to that.
Yeah.
We also don't see them engaging in the education system.
Right.
We also don't see them engaging really in the business sector.
Yeah.
Right. Or the entertainment sector. So if we're gonna follow that line of thinking, the scriptures are telling us that the way the gospel went out, right? It's everything we need for a life of godliness, but it doesn't get into many of those different areas.
Right.
And so if we're going to use that as our argument, then well, should Christians run businesses? Should Christians engage in the education system?
Yeah, Jesus didn't say anything about like business strategy.
No, he said nothing about that. He said nothing about. I mean, you could just carry all of the things out, right? And then remember that. What's the last verse? Is it Mark or John that ends with, if everything Jesus talked about had been written down, there would not be enough books in the world.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. So he obviously talked about a lot of things. They didn't all make it in the scriptures, but there's also a lot of things he didn't specifically address. So then we ask the question, what do we know is to be true? We know we're to disciple the nations. We know that we are to proclaim the gospel. We know that we're to be a part of the body of Christ, right? We know that we are to be salt and light. And so why not ask the question, how do I be salt and light in everything?
I'll add another one to that, to borrow from what a lot of the progressives say. We're called to love our neighbors.
Absolutely.
Right? And loving our neighbors, you want them to thrive. You want your neighbors to flourish.
Yep. Politics
plays a huge part in how much your neighbors can flourish.
Yep.
We heard ad nauseum about how you have to wear a mask if you love your neighbor. You have to do this if you love your neighbor. Accept this progressive policy if you love your neighbor. Well, we're doing what we do, and we believe what we believe because we love our neighbors.
Yeah, and creating a society that is that's safe.
Yeah.
That there's justice. Right? Your kids can grow up and be safe and educated. Like, that is loving your neighbor, right? And you're right, the left continues to attack this. And the biggest reason, well, Jesus never talked about it, right? That's what I typically hear from the conservative side.
Yeah.
Right? And I almost think it reveals that they have a misunderstanding or a misplace in their own heart. Because like when somebody looks at me and they're like, well, you've made an idol of politics. I'm like, no, I haven't. Like I just understand that my relationship with Christ should affect this part of my world. Yeah. And it's the most obvious place right now that is in need of the gospel. So I'm going to bring it up. Right. And if that makes you so uncomfortable, like what is so unsettled in you about something as ordinary as government that you can't talk about it in lieu of your relationship with Christ?
I think the one thing that's a little scary about it is that it's messy.
Yeah, it is.
Because so many of so much of our pietism and our kind of our pristine ideals, the things that we believe from Scripture that can remain neat and nicely packaged if we just leave them in our Bibles and not try to actually apply them out in the world. As soon as you bring it into the real world, things get messy. Personalities are involved. People are sinful. People fall short. You have to ask, can I vote for a guy like Trump?
Yep.
It's just messy. And people, I think people are scared of that a little bit.
Yeah.
Working out your faith in the world is a bit exposing, because not only are you dealing with messy people and their sin, but you're also kind of opening yourself up. We have these ideals and we have these things that we're trying to do politically. Well, you get involved in. But I talked to someone here locally who was trying to get me to run for some seat on something.
Oh yeah, are you going to?
And I
heard it here first.
I think my Twitter feed has already disqualified me from
that is true. They're just going to print
office.
that into the local newspaper.
There's too much ammo. Too much ammo there. But they told me if you do this, the left will. They'll dig into your past. They'll ruin you. They'll come after your family. They'll come after your kids. They'll find out everything that you've ever said. And so, as Christians, we hear a lot about public witness. Are we willing to jeopardize our public witness by getting involved in this messy arena of politics? And I'm thinking, that's. I think we absolutely have to.
Yeah. There's these certain verses in the scriptures that people will use, and they'll pull them out and they'll make them universal statements as opposed to this was true here and other things were true there. So like they'll think of Paul's statement like, well, live peacefully, right? Aspire to live quietly, these types of things. And this is true, right? But then people look that up and say, well, you should always be, well, this is the same guy who caused a riot in Ephesus, the same guy who got stoned, Paul, writing this. And so there were certain times and seasons where it's like live peacefully and aspire to live quietly. And then there's other times where you have to speak up and stand up and it's going to rile some people up.
Yeah.
And there's some verses that talk about having a character in such a way that people look in and go, wow, that person is like, I don't even agree with them, but that's a good person. And then there's other verses where they say you're going to be hated because you follow Jesus. And so just because one of them is true of some group of people doesn't mean that you're operating incorrectly.
Exactly. Yeah, there's some category error that happens. The other one that you hear all the time is, welcome the stranger. We're supposed to welcome the stranger. That's not a universal blanket statement for how every government policy should work, and how you don't welcome the stranger into your home at 11 p.m. at night if they crash down the door. Like, like there's some common sense involved in some of this stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. So, in recap, you are allowed to love your country appropriately.
Yes,
you are allowed to talk about these things. You're not a bad Christian if you care about the future of your nation. And but obviously, like we understand, we are we're passengers traveling through in this world.
I think that's good to remember, especially, we want to win. We're working to win.
Yep.
If the tide turns and if we start losing, if we start facing persecution, that's when those scriptures become really comforting.
Yeah.
To remember that, we lost this election. This Supreme Court decision didn't work out the way we wanted to, but reminding ourselves that this world's not our home. We are living for another kingdom.
Yep.
But we're still going to fight like crazy to help our neighbors here on this earth while we're here.
And through it all, we have a hope that that is an anchor for our soul. I preached on that last week. In fact, it's on the Clear Truth site. If you're needing hope right now, go listen to that sermon. So anyway, fascinating conversation with Joel. Thanks for stopping by.
Yeah.
To all of our watchers out there, thanks for giving Clear Truth a chance here.
Yes.
And if you click on the video near you, it's also Joel and I's face. You'll see our first premium content video. All right.
Yeah.
So if you subscribe today, you can watch Joel and I give you our opinion on the recent platform change by the Republican Party.
And stay tuned. More to come.